Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, November 13 regularly scheduled meeting of Zoning and Planning. We have just a couple items on our agenda tonight. I'm Deb Crossley, Chair of the committee, and I'm joined at the table by Councilor Vicki Danberg, Vice Chair of the committee, and over there by Holly Ryan, Ward Councilor from Ward 8. And to my right, Councilor Allison Leary at large from Ward 1, and online we have, I'm expecting Councilor Krinsman, I see you, at large from Ward 4. I'm expecting President Albright. I don't see her yet. She is en route to or in Washington, so she's going to try and zoom in. I don't see her yet. And then I see also Councilor Gentile is joining us.
There's Council President Albright.
Okay, so President Albright has joined us. Also at the table in the room, we have Director Barney Heath, Director of the Planning Department, and our trustee committee clerk, Jacqueline Norton. We do have an item we're voting this evening, I believe. So the planning board is with us. Is Mr. Kelly Brown here to introduce the board?
Hello, Madam Chair. I am searching for all our members, but I see Kevin McCormick is with us, Peter Doringer, Jen Malinsky, myself, Barney Heath, and
I think that's it.
That's it.
yeah, that is a quorum.
Yes, it is.
So, am I missing anyone?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the planning board, and we've also been joined by Councilor Emily Norton and Councilor Wright that I see so far. So with that, I'm going to go into first. We have a public hearing this evening related to the our first item on the agenda, and it is coming back to us. After that, for those of you who are here for the BERDO, the Building Energy Reporting and Reduction Disclosure Ordinance, something like that. Okay, we'll be taking that up afterwards. And I see that we're also joined by Councilor Lyle Baker, online, also a member of the committee, and I see we are also joined by Attorney Lee from the Law Department. So that's everyone I see so far on the first item, and that is 205-23, petition to rezone lots on Charles Street, Terrence Morris. Petitioning by changing the current zoning of the property known as in numbered 132 Charles Street and shown on the City of Newton Assessor's Database as Section 41, Block 6, lots plural 14, which are currently zoned multi-residence 1 and manufacturing, and Section 41, Block 6, Lot 26, currently zoned manufacturing, and turning them all to mixed use 1. This was before us earlier, and we unanimously held it on October 10th of 2023, and council sent it back to us, essentially. So who is here to begin this item or have any sort of a summary on this item? Are we going to do a recap, Director Heath?
I see Attorney Morris is here this evening, and Joe Iadonisi is also here.
Oh, why don't we begin with Joe?
Yeah,
okay.
Your preference.
That would be typical.
Sure.
Joe Iadonisi, can you please just give us a quick recap? I think everybody who's here for this item is familiar with it, but just for the sake of the public.
Yeah, so, certainly Attorney Morris can chime in at the end if there's anything that's changed. But as far as our last discussion, we don't have any updates on this. We still have the parcels that are at 126 and 132 Charles Street under question here. And it's in that patchwork of zoning where you have manufacturing, you have MR1 and you have MR2. The parcel itself is bordered by the commuter rail line coming from Auburndale, going towards Framingham, the Pike, the Charles River, and some of the Charles River Reservation, and over to the east, beyond the train tracks, there's a little bit of a neighborhood, but that's set up. So the parcel is quite isolated. Overall, the intent of the request was to move all that land from those three zones, which are part of the lot there, over to mixed use 1. So having one uniform code makes things a lot more simple as far as trying to get building permits, renovate the building, sell it to future owners. It's a matter of discretion if just that little tiny back part of the building that's located at 132 Charles, it's in MR1, rest of the building's in manufacturing, where there are differences in what the zoning ordinance allows. It's on ISD generally to make a judgment call as to how building permits are applied, because it can become quite confusing with nonconformities and how that works to have 2 zones over 1 building, and 3 zones in the 1 lot. Overall, there's not really a big impact to the abutters. You're not allowed to go any higher than the building already is, and it would just allow a uniform zone throughout there. As far as the information that we have from the owners, WZ, DNA Lab, and from Attorney Morris, there is no pending project on the books right now that they're planning on doing with this new zoning, but this would simplify future efforts. And that's all I have here.
Just one more thing, I did reread the report, and just to be clear, anything that you would want to add to this building, which is almost but not quite 20,000 square feet, would require a special permit, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. So if nobody has any questions or clarifying comments, I would move to open the public hearing. What I do understand is there was a community meeting, and Councilors Gentile, Markowitz, and Krinsman were there. I don't see Councilor Markowitz here either, but I can't always see everyone's name, so sorry if I'm missing you. And they did hold a community meeting, I think, probably for those residents whose backyards abut the cross street. But please clarify that, and I see Councilor Gentile, you've raised your hand. You're muted though, there you go.
I'll defer to Councilor Gentile. That meeting was held on September 23rd. It was well attended by the neighbors, and all 3 ward councilors were there. So I'll defer to Councilor Gentile to summarize
Okay.
the results of that hearing, and then that meeting, and I'll.
Sorry if I
fill
skipped
in
over
any
you,
voice.
Attorney Morris. I just saw Councilor Gentile's hand.
I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of a document. I'm hoping that it got to the committee. It was a memo from John Daglian, who was helpful in showing the entire area there, and that there are a couple of different lots that are in play. I want to thank the committee for taking this back and for giving the members of the abutters on Charles Street an opportunity to speak. What I want to make sure everybody is aware of, maybe Jacqueline has it, if you don't have it, but one of the issues that came up at that meeting and has been an issue for me is these 2 lots that are specifically referenced in the docket item. They are eligible for an A&R, an approval not required, and they could be combined. Those 2 lots would change this to about a 34,000 square foot lot. And then in addition to that, if you have this from John, there is a third lot that is an empty lot, that is owned by the family that sold 126 Charles Street to the new owners. And if they in turn were to sell this other lot, now you're talking about an A&R plan of over 44,000 square feet. I don't think that any work has been done on how that would change what could be built by a matter of right or administrative site plan review, or through a special permit. And it's that unknown that is causing me concern about approving this item. As was said at the last meeting, it's very unusual for us to change a zone without having an accompanying special permit. And that's why, you know, I'm inclined not to support what's being requested here. But I want to give the members of the neighborhood that have shown up an opportunity to speak, and I can address this a little bit later in the meeting after they've had a chance to speak.
Thank you, Counselor Gentle. I wonder, Counselor Gentle, I wonder if someone, either law or planning, can just comment on one thing you said, just for clarity. If they go through an A&R and combine lots, that doesn't eliminate the option, it doesn't eliminate the requirement of having a special permit, correct? And I won't ask you, Counselor Gentle, I'll ask either the law department or the planning department. You'd still need a special permit to do something. If you were to divide the lots into small lots for housing, for example, which I think you can't do under the proposed, then you might be able to do something by right, but there's no by right option.
I do have one clarifying comment. So the two lots there for 126 and 132 Charles are just under the new minimum new lot size for MU1. So they would have to have approval required to combine those two lots. For the third lot, if they do purchase that, which is speculative to say that they will, and speculative to say that they'll combine those, and speculative to say that they'll build something there, then they would have to potentially go through the special permit process, but they could combine lots, depending on what they're building, but they could combine those lots.
So can you just please be clear before we do this so everybody has the same information? If any of this lot combining is done, is there a by right option for rebuilding the site?
No.
Well, thank you. But Joe, could you just please
That's-
confirm
if
that
I-
before Mr.
if I
Norris goes
may.
forward? Yes, could you just wait a minute, let me have Joe answer the question, then I'll go right to you.
Yeah, as far as I see, I mean, it's hard to weigh in on plans that I can't actually see on paper. But, you know, whether it be on that one lot that's 132 Charles, or on the lot that's at 126 Charles, or on both of them, they could potentially get something under the existing zoning by right there. But I would imagine, and again, this is difficult to determine without having plans in front of me, but I would imagine it would be smaller because of,
It would have to
you
be
know,
under
they currently
20,000
have some
square feet.
nonconformities there. So I'm
Right.
guessing that they would most
Okay.
likely, almost certainly to build what they have today, have to go through a special permit.
Okay. So if they combine or reconfigure the lots or whatever, their buildings would have to be under 20,000 square feet in order to do a by right. Is that correct? Is that basically it?
I think that's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's the rules we've been
I just
operating
wanted
under.
to be
Yes.
super clear. So
Yeah, we
I'm-
can provide further clarification if necessary.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
So I would like to go to Attorney Morris, and then I'll open the public hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand Councilor Gentile's speculation about what might happen, but that was presented at the neighborhood meeting as well. My clients made it absolutely clear they have no intention of acquiring that piece of land, and even if they did, that is not the subject of this rezoning. That would continue to be zone MR1. And you're not gonna combine an MR1 lot with a manufacturing lot And if they were to try to develop that, they would have to come back for a rezoning for that piece.
Yep.
So I would suggest the committee is better served by focusing on what we petitioned for, which is the lots in question that are that have 3 different designations. And as the planning department reported in the report, it says the current zoning was not purposeful zoning. It was a result of what was left over, byproduct of the construction of the Mass Turnpike. And also, one of the things pointed out in the earlier memo was the fact that my clients are limited in what they can use the big building for, because part of that lot is located in the residential zone. So they can't fully utilize that building as a result. I think if we stick to and my clients were very open and receptive in receiving the neighborhood's comments at that meeting. They've expressed a willingness to basically, and it's unfortunate that Councilor Markowitz is not here, because we talked about the idea of establishing a neighborhood liaison so that there wouldn't be any surprises going down the road, such as acquiring an additional piece of property or proposing a building without people knowing about it. So I would hope that you would focus on a petition which is simply intended to clean up this hodgepodge of zonings. And I know it's not typically the council's focus to be so-called pro-business, but it is certainly, my client had a building permit that was held up for many, many months because of this zoning melange. And in order to avoid that happening in the future, I hope that you'll approve this zone as requested. Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh,
Attorney Morris.
one other thing.
Yes.
It's important to note that there's not one use that's allowed in the MU district that isn't already allowed in the manufacturing district, except for live workspace. Other than that, and so you're actually, if you look at it this way, you're taking one of the least restrictive zones, which allows a whole host of, I would say, unwanted activities from a residential neighborhood, and you're taking those off the table by putting this in a mixed-use zone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no further comments from city councilors at the moment, I will open the public hearing. I see one hand, I see 2 hands. Anybody who wants to speak to this, please raise your hand so we get a handle on. If it's just 2, that's fine. Amy Sangello, welcome.
I'm gonna raise my hand as well.
Okay,
Hi.
just before you start speaking, I see someone raising her actual hand. If you can raise your electronic hand, otherwise I am taking down your name as Mia Levine.
My name is Lisa Levine.
Oh, Lisa.
And,
Okay, I'm just gonna put you in order. So, okay, I see you. I just wanted to recognize you, but the first speaker is Amy Sangiolo, okay?
Well, I don't know how to do an electronic hand.
I get it, I get it. I got you now. I'll call on you in a minute.
Thank you. No worries.
Amy Sangiolo.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for taking my comment. I'm Amy Sangiolo. I live at 389 Central Street, and I am in a butter, I guess, to an abutter. And so I was notified of this hearing. I testified last time, and I don't think my comments have changed. I'm concerned about the changing of the zones. While I realize this may limit the petitioner to what he can do, he has already said that what they might want to do is allowed under the current zoning. I think what was very evident to me was Joe Iadonisi's. He seemed, I appreciate your response to Councillor Crossley about what the petitioner could or could not do. But as you said, without seeing some plans on paper, it's difficult to kind of determine what can be done by right, what cannot be done by right, what would require a special permit. And that's what's concerning to me. I appreciate that Councillor Gentile, Markowitz, and Krinsman had a meeting, and I'm sorry that I was unable to attend that meeting. But again, I still remain concerned that we are going to rezone this without knowing what the future plans could be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Nathan Phillips.
I thank you for taking my comment.
Oh, we can't hear you, Nathan. Nathan, we can't hear you. Are you close? Can you get closer to your mic?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so Nathan Phillips at 73 Charles Street. So I believe we are the closest residents to that, the parcels in question. And I wanted to just note that we have a pretty serious traffic and parking issue on Charles Street, to the point that it's a safety issue with that tunnel and cars, a lot of cars moving through the tunnel to access that site. And there's been close calls, you know, with the amount of traffic and how fast the traffic's moving. So with all of the zoning considerations, I haven't heard any comments regarding parking and traffic. And I think there needs to be a study done. Any company these days does a traffic demand management and a parking demand management plan. That's kind of standard. And so without that kind of knowledge of what the future plans are for traffic load, I think the best thing for now is to hold the item or come back later when they have a better idea of what they want to do, because I think the traffic is a very, very big concern. It's a safety concern, and I think it needs to be discussed. Meanwhile, there's a lot of things happening, like the bridge, the footbridge over the Charles River is being completed. I don't think the applicants even know about what the possibilities are for parking on the other side, for example. And until they're educated on that, I think they really should wait on seeking this zoning change. I'm glad the attorney Morris has talked about neighborhood liaison. At that community meeting, I shared my phone and email address and really welcomed the petitioners to talk and walk around and think together on how this could work for them and also work for the neighborhood. Unfortunately, I have not heard from them, but I still would really welcome the opportunity to engage with the applicant, because I would love to see that as a vibrant, an economically vibrant place where their business can thrive. But if they're not aware of the possibilities for doing it in a way that doesn't involve more parking and more cars and overloading the street with traffic, they really need to, we need to know what their thoughts are on that traffic burden issue. So I would urge that this item be not passed tonight. Thank you.
So, Mr. Phillips, can I just ask you a question, since there's very few hands up, and I still am going to get back to Ms. Levine. You understand that if there's any kind of development on this site, it would require a special permit, which is normally when those kinds of things come up and get resolved, because they're just asking for a zone change now. This is not like a land use item.
I guess I don't understand the relationship between that and just not knowing what the parking need will be. What they can build on the site by right, I don't know how that relates to what we can expect in terms of traffic and parking issues. So if someone, if the law department or the attorney can speak to that, that would be really wonderful to understand even by right what they can do, what that's going to mean for the traffic on Charles Street.
I tell you what, okay, thank you. So what I'll ask either Mr. Edenisi or Director Heath to speak to is what the parking, there's already parking requirements in the zone for certain uses. Those aren't gonna, they're in the current zone, they would be in the new zone. I'm not 100% familiar with them, but there are parking requirements. So you understand that they can use their building however they like right now, and as long as they're not adding to it to go over 20,000 square feet, they don't need any further permissions. But if they were to propose a project, and the building's almost 20,000 square feet now, so if they were proposing to build a new building on their now 2 sites that they could merge, it would likely be bigger than 20,000 square feet, and they'd have to go through all these reviews, including a traffic study and so forth. Zoning is just what you may do by, in this case, by special permit, and There are no by right options in here, right now. The by right options, as Councilor Gentile suggested, are only if there's lot reconfigurations, which we don't know, we don't ever know if that's gonna happen anywhere in the city. So I just wanted to point that out, because I hear your concerns about the traffic problems that exist on the site, but there's nothing being proposed here to be built. They're just asking for a zone change, change of rules. Ms. Levine.
Yes.
Thank you. Please state your name again.
Yep, I'm Lisa Levine at 24 Charles Street. I've lived here for my entire life, and I've seen things change dramatically. I hear all of what you're saying, but my concern still goes back to what Lenny was saying and Nathan about why do this until you have a plan that we can look at and take advantage of and work together. But there's a whole bunch of things that I think are mischaracterized about this, our parcel or parcels of land. The first and foremost important thing is no abutters on Charles Street were ever notified. Now, I don't know if we fall in the abutters or not, but Charles Street is a very small dead-end street, so no one was notified. If I wasn't the person that read Fig Street News, and sorry, I'm saying it wrong. I'm very interested in what's going on in my community. So I did notice that this was coming up on rather short notice, and none of my neighbors were aware of it. So there was no communication between us. Luckily, I reached out to Chris Markowitz, and then he spoke with Lenny and Josh. But so in the future, how are we going to know what's going on? Do we need to babysit this 24 hours a day? The other thing that was mentioned by the nice man at City Hall, Charles Street is not a crossroad. It's a dead-end street, a small dead-end street, and it's not a crossroad. All traffic comes in and out on that road. They were proposing 40 parking spaces. For years, we have been working with City Hall with the traffic, the speeding. We have AA meetings at the end of the street. I have no problem, but we've had consistent issues with the speeding down the street. We have the footbridge, we have the Mass Turnpike. It's just a disaster. We have the LaSalle Boathouse. There's just a million things at this end of the street. And every time something comes up, no one ever addresses the parking. We went to City Hall back maybe a couple of years ago, and we discussed the parking with them. And we finally got something in place where there was no parking on one side of the street. But now, people are just, the parking's never enforced on this street. And my concern, especially with this abolishing the overnight parking ban, is we're gonna have a narrow street, fire engines, ambulances can't get down, snow covered, 40, 50, 60 or more cars coming in and out of here a day. And I just think this street is already overburdened. Until they have something in place that they can say, here, this is what we're thinking, show it to the neighbors, be notified, because as I said, no one on this street was ever notified this was happening. I really, and I think I echo the sentiments of a lot of the people in my neighborhood.
Thank you very much. I just confirmed with the clerk that all property owners within 300 feet of this parcel or any point of these parcels were notified for this hearing and the previous one. This is the second hearing we're having on this. So I don't know if you're in 300 feet or any of these, within 300 feet maybe isn't that much in
Lenny,
this
could you
particular.
speak to that, please? Because as you know, none of us were notified.
The clerk's registry went out, so I'm not sure how that's possible, but for everyone not to be notified. So 300 feet from the parcel, they just basically draw a circle on the map and notices go out. So
And who the notices went to what pieces of?
Everybody who lives within 300 feet as in a straight line from any point of those parcels, according to the clerk's office.
So that is no one?
There's no one who lives within 300 feet?
Correct.
Okay, all
The
right.
closest is Nathan, and he did not receive anything.
Okay.
Am I correct, right, Nathan?
Okay. Okay, is there anyone else from the public who would like to speak to this item before I go back to any counselors. I see Ted Chapman. Please go ahead. Mr. Chapman? You need to unmute. I get, you just raised your hand, so I'm gonna assume you're having a little technical difficulties. I will go next to Amy.
Oh, I got it now.
Oh,
I've got
never
it now.
mind. Okay,
So-
go ahead.
The only other complication about this parcel is that there's gonna be a huge, and this has to do with Charles Street and how Charles Street is going to function. In addition to, whatever new parking areas there are, there's going to be a new bridge that will open next year. There's potentially a lot of bike and pedestrian traffic that will be going through this area to Charles Street and connecting to the Greenway on Commonwealth Avenue. So whatever plans that you have for this area, they need to be comprehensive enough to include accommodating that kind of traffic safely, pedestrian and bike traffic.
Thank you.
And I don't know the lot dimensions, but you know, there's a lot of parking on the asphalt in front of these buildings, and whether that's actually a street or it's owned by the property. But you know, I think that's there may need to be some underground parking.
Thank you. Again, there's no project proposed, so the property owners have the right to use their property as it is currently built, according to the current zoning uses that are allowed or the existing use. So this is, we don't have any information about, they just want to simplify the zoning. So if they do want to do something, they have to come in for a special permit, and then all of this stuff would be in order. I just want to say these things just so everybody understands we're talking about zoning, not a project. Ms. Chasen, are you able to unmute? Oh, you are unmuted.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for taking my comments. I live on 67 Charles Street. I'm 2 doors down from Nathan. I just wanted to echo what Lisa and Nathan were saying about the safety concerns. So right now, I don't believe they have the 40 cars going to and from their property right now. But if they build the parking lot, to me, that indicates that they may have a staffing plan, a growth plan in place, right, for the future, where they would have the cars. I have young kids. I might have the youngest child on the street. I have a 10-month-old. My concerns with the safety are, as Lisa stated, so we have no parking on one side of the street. It's not observed, especially down the second half of the street. So further down towards the building, we have parking, no parking on one side. It's the even side that you can park, the odd side you can't. So we don't have people observing that, and nothing happens. And we do have issue where we've had fire trucks and having a hard time getting down the street. So I do have concerns with that. The other thing is we don't have sidewalks all the way down the street. We do have children on the street. And because it's a dead end, we do have kids who are gonna play in the street, ride their bikes. We just don't have anywhere that they can do that safely. And now you're gonna increase the traffic. So I just have concerns with the kids in the neighborhood. There's a lot of people with dogs, a lot of people walking their dogs. This is a big dog area because we have the dead end and we have the parcel of land that sits behind kind of that recreation space, which I'm sorry, I can't remember, but it's the DRC space. So I just echo their concerns that there is kind of a safety issue here if we do increase the numbers of cars on the street.
Madam Chair, I think we need to docket something in public safety and transportation.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are the current issues that they're discussing.
Right. Councilor Leary is just pointing out that these are current issues that you are discussing. There's no project on the table that where we are evaluating the parking requirements of a new use. They have a building that they're allowed to use as it is without our input. They're just asking for simplification of the zoning. That's not to say we should give it or not give it. Just want people to understand, we're talking about what the rules should be going forward that allow what kind of a use or uses on the site. Not, and maybe I could ask Mr. Iandenisi, could you speak to whether or not, well, let me ask the question a different way. The new uses that are allowed, I believe I understand, are the same as the existing uses that are allowed, with one exception. You're allowed to have a live-work play space, or a live-work space, I'm sorry, not live-work play. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's also business incubator, which is allowed in the manufacturing, but not allowed in the multi-residence part, but we don't really see that one. But that's correct, Councilor Cross.
So what's allowed today is the same as what's going to be allowed if we pass this, except we won't have, we won't allow a business incubator, and we will allow a live workspace.
We would allow those two. Those are the only
two,
two
okay.
unique uses for mixed use one that would currently not be allowed underneath the manufacturing and multi-residence 1 and 2 zones that are currently in place.
Okay, so can you speak to, put it this way, because people clearly have some parking and traffic issues in this area that they're concerned about that exist. But this building and lot also exists, but they just want to change the use. They want to move to a different zone to make it all the same zone instead of mixed zones. So can you speak to, given that the uses are almost identical, is there any difference in how much traffic this, unless the site is redeveloped, which requires a special permit, and all this stuff is fair game, but it's not being redeveloped. They just want to change the zone. So could that increase the traffic? I mean, if they fill the building according to the current uses versus the proposed uses, is there any difference in the parking requirements or anything like that?
Currently, it's what I understand would be non-conforming. I haven't personally counted the parking spaces that are provided, but just taking a quick look overhead at it, it wouldn't meet parking requirements today, but it also is difficult to determine because it's under the research and development use, which requires a per employee, 1 spot per every 4 employees, and then 1 spot per every 1,000 square feet. So my understanding now is that it would probably be non-conforming to where that wouldn't fully kick in, as this building would predate the zoning. But if they were to redevelop the site, that is where they would potentially have the need to put in more parking spaces than they currently have.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
That's probably not for anyone else but a few of us, because it's such a complicated answer. I was kind of looking for a yes or no, or sort of a range of if it's really very different one way or the other. But never mind, if you can't answer that, that's fine.
Yeah, it's just use dependent, and whether or not the property is pre-existing non-conforming, or if they redevelop, they would trigger new parking requirements, or if they change the use.
I'm not talking about redevelopment. I'm trying to make the point with folks, maybe you can make it more cleanly than I can make it, that we're not talking about a project here. So we don't, we're talking about a rezoning, and we're just talking about what new uses could be allowed, which that really they aren't very different from what's allowed today. We're just trying to give them one zone instead of multiple zones. Am I saying that clearly? Okay.
That's correct, Counselor.
All right, thanks. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak? I see, before I take people for a second time. Okay, I'll go back to Amy Sangiolo, and then I'll bring it into council.
Councilor Gentile.
I see.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't want to repeat myself, but I think, you just made my point by saying how difficult it is to understand what the implications could be, because we don't know what the new potential use could be. So if the petitioner is able to do what they want to do under the new zoning, that under a different zone, then why change the zone until you know what the new use is going to be? Why not do what the city council has done historically and change the zone when they're doing a special permit. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Counselor Gentile?
Mia Levine has her hand up too, again.
Okay, I'll go for a second time to Mia Levine. I'm not gonna go around over and over again, so the second time is gonna be it.
Lisa, hold on a minute, will you please, Lisa, for just a minute? Because I want to pick up on, I can't say it any better than Amy just said it. If there's no project, then why are we rezoning the site? There hasn't been a case made to need to rezone the site. I want to remind you, what's in front of you is to rezone two parcels, 132 and 126 Charles Street. Those parcels are owned by the same owner. They can file an A&R tomorrow and increase that lot from up to 33,000 square feet with the two of them. The planning department did their regular analysis of what could be done basically with the existing building on 132. They did not look into the possibility of combining the two. I keep hearing people say, well, anything that would be changed there would have to be a special permit. We don't know that for sure. That's what the big concern is here, because the analysis hasn't been done. So if you rezone both parcels, and both parcels are owned by the same owner as they are, you're now creating a new and a larger lot, and planning has not done an analysis of what could take place at that lot. This, as far as the parking goes, to answer Ted, where people park now is across the street from the building on what is Charles Street, which is, you know, owned by the city. It's not owned by the owner. I'm not even sure where they park on the site. So please keep in mind that we're not being asked just to rezone the parcel that the building sits on today. We're being asked to rezone both parcels, and I don't hear Mr. Iandosi saying this. He's saying best as he can tell right now. He's not offering any guarantees that there aren't other rights, by right options that could be built there if the two lots were combined. You really need to go down to the site. It's a dead-end street. There's no parking at the dead-end street. It's been a kind of a lazy use in the past. It's a quiet use in the past. It hasn't had a lot of activity going on it. And the concern is that the use could intensify quite a bit more than it has been, especially if you combine the two lots. Some of you may remember the canoe rental place down at on Commonwealth Ave. The first time I got involved with this site is when we were getting complaints because the canoes were being stored at 132, and it was creating a heck of a lot of traffic in and out. Then the next thing that happened was the LaSalle Boathouse. There's activity at the end of the street already that has caused problems in the past, which is why people are so sensitive as to what might happen at this site. If they want to propose something, propose it. If they need it to be rezoned, then we'll look at it based on the merits. But I don't understand why we would go ahead without knowing what is specifically being proposed for what could be a totally new site.
Because you have one building and two sites with two different zones. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor Gentile. Make sure I can see. I'll recognize Attorney Morris. Attorney Morris? You're muted, Attorney Morris.
Yeah, I got you. Okay. I feel like I'm fighting here with a straw man. I mean, you set up this idea that combining the two lots, so then you'd have one lot with a 19,000 something square foot. If you still go over 20,000 square feet, you're subject to some sort of zoning control, site plan review. So I don't know what this is a canard, you know, this idea that's an A&R plan suddenly changes the landscape. It doesn't. It doesn't. Right now, they're both zone manufacturing. So whatever you can do, but the point is that as I say, that we're raising the specter of some development, first of all, that is not in the works. My clients appeared personally before the neighbors who were there were more than, close to 20 neighbors there, if not more, and said clearly they have no intentions of basically, in the foreseeable future, of expanding. And so now, but, you know, as I say, I don't know how to fight a ghost.
Thank you, Attorney Morris. I'm thinking we should close the public hearing and bring this into committee, and that we should move it forward to first full council, but that's, I want to hear from the committee. We don't have that much time left in the term, and it would be good to settle this. It's been before us twice now. I think I heard that Councilor Markowitz had joined us. I'll ask you first if you would like to speak to this, and Councilor Krinsman as well.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I don't know if you want to close the public hearing, or if you want to let the planning board.
I'd love for you
do their public hearing.
to move to close the public hearing, and then let's hear from you.
Sure, I'm happy to move to close the public hearing.
Okay, all those in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is there any, Councilor Wright, you're here with us. I'm sorry, I don't remember if I saw you earlier. All those opposed or abstentions, anyone? Okay, thank you. The public hearing is closed. Planning board?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we'd be ready to close it. Do I have a motion for closing the public hearing?
So moved.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Peter, yeah. Barney, are you in or out on this one?
I would move to close the public hearing.
Well, how do you vote? Are you voting on that, or are you abstaining?
I will vote on that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So we've closed the public hearing. Councilor Krinsman, I'll call on you first if you would like to add anything to this discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what we heard tonight from residents, it certainly is typical of what we've heard from the folks who were there at the community meeting and folks who have emailed. The concern we initially had, I think, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but the Ward 4 councilors had expressed a concern about a lack of understanding about why this was necessary, and if it wasn't necessary, you know, sort of a philosophy of do no harm. As you heard tonight, there is certainly consternation in the area about what could happen if we do this, what unintended consequences could happen. We have, at least I have not gotten a really good answer to why do we need to do this. And so I would think that we should not support this item. I don't know if the right move is to hold it or reject it, but I'm certainly not going to support the item.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone should. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Krinsman. It's your ward, but I hope we don't hold it in committee. So I don't know if others want to speak to this. I'd like to ask a question of the Ward 4 councilors. So I'm listening to folks, and I'm not hearing that there's clear understanding between asking for a change of zone and the kinds of issues that come up when we have a project before us. The second thing I'm not hearing is a clear understanding that the proposed change of zone is to clean up this place where we literally have a building straddling two parcels, and so in two different zones. We heard that has caused some problems with the building owner being able to get building permits to do work in the buildings they own, which they're allowed to use however they wish according to the current zoning, which is not very different from the proposed zoning. So I'm a little, you know, I'm hearing some confusion and among the folks who have spoken, and I don't know if any of you have any thoughts about that. If you don't, I'll go to Councilor Baker.
Well, I'm happy to quickly respond, which is, again, we weren't given any reasonable reason why this was necessary. We asked the question. I don't think the burden is on folks to refute that or come up with a reason why not to present the zoning change. I think if someone's coming in and asking for a zoning change, they should make it clear why they're seeking that change. And that question hasn't been answered, at least not to my satisfaction.
Okay.
If I might just add one additional point, I agree with what Josh just said. If you go by that building today, at least when we were there a month or so ago, there's plenty of work going on at the building. So I'm not sure what happened or what kind of inconvenience occurred to get the building permit, but they clearly have a building permit now, and they're working on the building. And that also begs the question, if it's about getting working permits or whatever for 132, why has 126 also been requested to be rezoned? So we just haven't gotten satisfactory answers. We're not trying to be, unfairly treating of the new owner, but we just don't have questions to what is some very, simple and apparent questions that we've raised about, why they need these changes done now when the work is going on.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Leary?
Yeah, that brought up, one of the reasons why I thought there was going to be a community meeting would be to answer some of these questions, because I haven't heard either that is it a current hardship for the building owners under the current zoning to conduct business as is or to attract new customers or anything like that. Is there an actual economic hardship to this zoning that they're feeling now, and what is that exactly?
That was not raised at the meeting.
That would be a reason to go ahead with rezoning it, and that's the only reason I can think of that would make sense to me.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Baker, and then Danberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay? I know the connection is sometimes not great.
We can hear you.
So I guess my question is really that I'm hearing some confusion about whether there's really very much difference in the opportunity to use the parcel now, or both parcels, in the current zoning from what could occur. And I'm also sort of challenged to find out what the rationale is. Hearing that the board, 4 councilors are not in favor of this is because they know the area better than I, leads me to be cautious about voting in favor of this change. It seems to me that if we turn this down, then the item can't be taken up for another year, and there's just under our own council rules, and I think there are circumstances under the state law where a denial is a real problem. It seems to me that if there is a potential future use that could be coming forward, that would be to the petitioner's advantage to withdraw without prejudice rather than face a denial. But I'm hard pressed to vote for this without having a little more clarity than I've got from the conversation so far. I just wanted to indicate that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Danberg.
There's one question that I had based on something that I heard earlier, and I'd like to get a clarification on it. So this question would be to Mr. Morris. I understood that there was a problem with a portion of it being in a residential zone, and that the owner was not able to completely use the building because of that. Could you clarify that, please?
Thank you, Councilor Danberg. I actually, early on in the process, wrote a letter explaining more fully the rationale behind this petition. They filed a building permit to do some work on 132. And they were held up in inspectional services because they were incorrectly told at the time that it couldn't be it couldn't be issued because of the the dual zones. That got kicked around for several months before Jane Sanaswasa, the zoning code officer, got involved and gave them, and told them that they could move forward, but not without, I think, as much as a 3-month delay in the process. So them looking at what they had to undergo this time, they thought to themselves, well, let's clean this up. So that's why they came here, not because they have any grand idea of developing the property, down the road. That's how it originated. But Councilor Gentile is right. They have a permit, they're doing work, and eventually they'll use the building, but the point is that you're still left with a hodgepodge of zones that defies logic.
Okay, can I get a clarification on that?
Sure.
Mr. Morris, are you saying that they can't fully utilize the building? And it's an economic hardship for the business under the current zoning?
No,
Are they suffering
no,
under this?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that is the case currently, no. If one is using that as a justification for doing this, then I would take that off the table.
Okay, I guess, I hope we've all seen, and we have in front of us here tonight, the use tables for the two different zones. And it is true, actually, in the manufacturing district, there are a number of uses allowed without a special permit that are not allowed in the MU1. And I just thought it might be relevant to list them, because I want to assume that all counselors have looked at these lists and trying to determine what's best for the community. So the differences are, in the manufacturing district, you can have a job printing service by right, not in MU1, not at all. You can have a kennel by right in the manufacturing district, not at all in MU1. You can have a veterinary hospital by right in the manufacturing district, but not, but only by special permit in the MU1. Looking down that list, it just seems to me that there's more control over the uses, the commercial uses in the MU1 district than there is in the manufacturing district. These are pages 6 and 7 of the planning department report. We specifically asked for this list last time, and we didn't go over it deeply. But I'm kind of personally at a loss to understand what the big deal is here. I do hear the residents that you're concerned about parking and traffic, which I don't know if there's anybody in the city who isn't concerned about parking and traffic. And then, of course, if a new development is coming, you want to look at that really carefully and understand actual impacts. But there's no new development coming here. We're talking about what uses we allow on the site and whether by right or by special permit, and also trying to clean up the area so that the uses are consistent. These two properties each has a building on it by the map I'm looking at, and one of the buildings does go over the line between two parcels. That just seems really messy to me, and somebody said there's no residence within 300 feet of the property, and I don't think that's right, because there's MR zones here, and people did get noticed. So I do see that in the SR3 zone, people are way farther away than that, so it would make sense why they did not get noticed. So I'm kind of at a loss to understand this. And I also am sensitive to what Councilor Baker mentioned about how we handle this. If it goes down this term, then the petitioner can't take it up again. So, I'm not sure how people are thinking of voting on this, but I see Counselor Krinsman has his hand up again. Want to help me out here?
Yeah, I'd like to move to reject this subject to second call, and I do that in light of what Councilor Baker has said, and with the hope that if we do vote, if folks are persuaded that there's not enough reason to do this, and that we do reject this, that perhaps the petitioner will withdraw this in advance of the next city council meeting. So I move to reject subject to second call.
You're moving to deny, subject to second
Deny,
call?
yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. All right. We have a motion on the table to deny. All those in favor of denial, all those who want to reject this petition, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is 3. I believe I heard 3, Krinsman, Baker, and Wright. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right.
And is Counselor Albright with us still? President Albright? I think she's pretty far away. She may have had to cut out. Okay, so that's 3. All those opposed to denial, please say no, I guess. Please say no.
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 I'm gonna abstain.
All right, we have three noes, 3 ayes, and 1 abstention. There we go. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us on this. Sorry, planning board, are you ready to vote this item?
Actually,
Clarify. You don't have
before,
in favor, do you want to report out just a tied vote for denial? That's fair.
I'm sorry, Counselor Baker, could you speak up?
I'm
Several
sorry,
people.
this was a matter of procedure. I think you had a tied vote for denial,
Yes.
and that motion failed. So then you have to move another motion in committee if there's going to be a disposition. There's no disposition of this yet. As I hear it.
Madam Chair, I actually had my hand up and I was going to say the same thing as Councilor Baker. I believe there needs to be a motion for approval. And then, of course, if it's a tied vote, it fails, and then the recommendation is that from the committee would be that it is to be rejected. But I believe you do have to have that motion in the affirmative.
Okay, should I move to reconsideration then? Is that what we should do? Or someone should move reconsideration, or does it matter? We can just.
Someone can just move approval because we don't have a successful motion yet.
Okay, all right, thank you. We have a motion to approve the item.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can you just report the previous vote? I know who voted in favor of denial, but it wasn't clear to me who voted against denial and who abstained.
Counselor Leary abstained. President Albright is not here, so I and Counselor Danberg and Ryan voted against denial. Double
Okay.
negative. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we now have a motion to approve the petition to rezone. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. That's 3. All those opposed, please say no.
No.
And that is Krinsman, Baker, and Wright. And
1 abstention.
1 abstention. 3, and 1
Stunning
abstention.
outcome.
All right, folks, and I'm sorry now, Mr. Kelly Brown, please.
yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was having trouble with the parliamentary procedure myself, so I think I get it now. I guess I want to ask the board in light of this discussion, are we prepared to move tonight, or it sounds like there was some outstanding questions that were not settled, so I wasn't sure what your pleasure was.
It failed, yes.
No, our board.
Yeah, no.
Our board.
Right.
The planning board.
Before you decide, can we talk about the calendar? So this would
Good point.
go before the full city council. If I have my dates right, Jacqueline, please, is it December 4th?
The 20th.
Oh, the 20th,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Monday.
I'm way ahead of myself. November 20th. So I guess there's time if you're not ready to weigh in, but we can't vote on it in full council until you do.
And-
Madam Chair, it needs a 2/3 vote, does it not?
Yes,
Okay.
there's nothing related to housing in
I
this.
think,
So Chair
just,
Brown, I think we need to act this evening if we can, because we're gonna have an issue with timing. If the full city council is gonna take this up on the 20th. Attorney Lee can opine on that as well, but I think the planning board has to provide a recommendation.
And full council could postpone until they get it, on the other hand.
exactly, that's exactly what I was thinking, unless members wanted to either, propose approval or not, or to hold until our next meeting, which would be the beginning of December.
Oh.
December 4th.
Oh, your next meeting is December 4th, which is the following full council meeting, so up to you.
Jen?
Council?
Kelly, it would be nice to have some time to talk about this, but I don't know that we do. So I'm persuaded by the conversation tonight that this is a rational move and that the uses actually are more consistent with having residents abutting the property. So I would make a motion to approve this proposal.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
I just want to point out, you've been joined by Amy Dane, so you have another member, because she was not
Oh, thank you.
introduced at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay. I'm not seeing any planning board hands in the air, so.
You have to call for
I
a
suppose
vote.
we can just vote, so all in favor of approving the petition, say aye.
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 Amy?
Yep, aye.
It is approved.
I'll abstain on that for the record.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much, and unless the planning board would like to join us for a piece of work that's taken a huge amount of effort to put together, but will be moved to next term. Please join us if you like, but I think it's not necessary. We will not be voting on this evening. Thank you everyone for coming, and have a good night if you are going to be taking off at this point. So, we have a very brief update, and I want to introduce the sustainability co-chairs who are with us tonight. But this update, the first one will come from Ann Berwick. We're also joined by Bill Ferguson, and we are joined by stellar members of the Energy Commission, who I will introduce as we get into the following topic. But the first one is 94-23, and this is discussion and possible ordinance requiring electrification of all new construction and substantial renovations. And this is about Newton's participation, attempt to participate so far in the 10 Communities program to require electrification for all new construction and substantial renovation. Director Berwick, would you like to give us the short skinny on this?
I'll give the very short skinny, and then if you need more, please tell me. So I think, as you all know, in order for the city, because we're a home rule state, to require electrification of new construction and substantial renovation, we need state permission. And the way that has devolved is through state legislation that has said the first 10 communities that filed home rule petitions asking to be allowed to require electrification will be allowed if they meet certain Department of Energy Resources requirements. So Newton was one of the first 10 to file home rule petitions. So presumably we should be one of the 10 that will be allowed to require electrification. However, we need further DOER permission, all of the 10. It's actually now 9, but I won't go into that unless somebody wants me to. We need further DOER permission, so how do we get that? In order to do that, we had to file an application to DOER by September 1. We actually filed it in July. Since July, I have contacted DOER 3 times and have heard nothing back. And as far as I know, none of the other communities have heard anything from DOER. Well, when I say nothing back, each time they respond to me saying, we have your proposal, thank you, we're considering it. Just nothing substantive back. I presume, but I'm not certain, that DOER will in fact approve our proposal. That will require DOER's approval of certain details, which I can go through in a moment, in the proposal. But also it's important to note, DOER, we will have had to have passed a electrification ordinance by July of 2024 and meet the home rule of the housing affordability provisions in the statute by February of this year. We can meet the housing affordability provisions by either complying with the MBTA, communities law, or by meeting the 40B requirements. We can't, so go back now to what I said about we will have to approve the electrification ordinance. We can't do that actually until DOER tells us whether certain of the provisions that we have proposed to them are acceptable. So I'm not sure what to say about that. Simply waiting for DOER to tell us, yes, if you Newton approve an electrification ordinance that looks like this, and if you meet the housing affordability requirements, you can be one of the 10. So ask me questions, but my response, I think, is likely to most of the questions to be, I'm just waiting to hear from DOER. And I can keep asking them, but since I've asked them 3 times and beat the timeline for submitting Newton's proposal by a little more than a month, I'm not sure what more I can do.
Understand, and I know that certain people, one of whom has her hand raised, have been asking for a long time, what's the status, what's the status, what's the status? And we know one more thing, well, we know how this could play out. We have not yet met our affordability requirement under Chapter 40B to our knowledge, but I would love if Andrew Lee, if you know, is the law department going to be doing a recalculation anytime soon? Because we don't have to worry about that if we pass the MBTA communities compliant package under VCOD, because that would also satisfy the requirement. Could you speak to that before I take hands?
Unfortunately, I can't, Madam Chair. Deputy Solicitor Jonah Temple has been working with the planning department on the calculation. I haven't been involved in that process.
Well, I can say that I asked the planning department where we stand with respect to 40B. I asked Jen Kyra, and she told me it's unclear whether we will meet the housing affordability requirements under 40B by the February date.
Okay, and
that's correct, yeah. So we haven't met it to date. It's unclear as to whether we'll meet it by February.
what does it depend on? What are you waiting for?
It's complicated. It depends on whether or not Northland pulls a building permit, whether Dunstan East pulls a building permit. I'd have to look at some of the other contingencies, but it's those kinds of things that indicate whether or not you meet the 40B threshold.
So,
And we haven't met it yet. The recent approval by the ZBA for the Northland Charlemont project brought us closer, but still doesn't get us there.
right,
So-
and the other Northland project was a special permit, so whether they pull a building permit or not, only the chapter 40B projects count if you pull a building permit.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we're
so
waiting
we
for
have those.
Dunstan.
Yep.
Okay,
So I think it's important to understand that the ability to require, for Newton to require electrification of all new construction and substantial renovations rests at the moment on our compliance with the MBTA communities law.
yeah, got it, okay, thank you. So hands up, Counselor Norton and then Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that summary, Ms. Berwick. My question was, I thought that what the state passed was preempting what we had passed. So can you explain that, what this means, that we still have to wait for them to approve what we did?
I don't have any idea what you mean by what the state has done preempts what we're doing.
When we talked about cooking and whether cooking was included, I have an email exchange where we talked about that we had left it out by accident, so we went back to the clerk to put it in, but it didn't really matter because the state's version included cooking. So I thought from that the state's passage of this 10 community law, or piece of their bigger law, covered what all of the 10 communities could do. I didn't know that within that state law, communities could still do their own thing.
Well,
I think,
communities.
Can I try? I think, to be clear, the ordinance that we passed in committee was submitted to DOER for approval, which is a necessary step. We had to do that by September 1st. And there were a couple of pieces of that ordinance that we added, the committee wanted to put in, and I think that may be part of what you're asking. We had to submit for compliance, they had to approve. They haven't approved. But our ordinance has some things in it that are not in the state's model. So
yeah, there are quite a few things in our ordinance that are not in the state's model. We believe, or I believe anyway, and I think the other communities believe as well, that most of those will be unproblematic. For example, outdoor cooking, which is not connected to the building's gas infrastructure, should be okay. But we have a few other things, as do other communities, in our proposed ordinance that are not in DOER's model rule. For example, process loads, exempting process loads. And I can talk about what that means if you'd like.
we probably shouldn't go into that level of detail
We don't
tonight.
need to do that. Okay, I appreciate that. And so are they just claiming that they don't have enough staff, or?
Again, I'm not getting any response from them other than we're reviewing proposals.
Okay, thank you.
Council Wright.
I would
Oh,
say more, but I don't know any.
It's okay. Council Wright.
When I was reading this on page 8 and 9, there was a lot of documentation that the business owners need to do, which I think it's good, but it almost seems way too burdensome.
Council Wright,
I
you're
don't
on
know,
the
have
wrong-
you
Council Wright-
discussed?
Council Wright, I'm sorry, you're on the wrong subject. We're getting an update on the 10 communities electrification ordinance, and then we're moving into Berto.
Oh, okay. Oh, I have one question. So I just read an article really quick. So Boston's pulling out, and they said because it's too complicated and and they don't think the grid will support doing this.
No,
That's not what Boston has said.
Okay, what did they say? Well, at least that's what the Globe said that Boston
Yeah,
said.
so, thank you. There are conflicting reports between the Globe and the WBUR stories, and I've tried over today, basically, because this all came out yesterday, to get to the bottom of it. Haven't been able to yet. So what happened was, a report came out saying that, okay, initially there were 10. One of those, West Tisbury, withdrew early on, saying it was not going to be able to meet the housing affordability requirements. Fine, that leaves 9. So a number of other communities had also filed home rule petitions to allow them to electrify. Those were Boston, Somerville, Salem, and Northampton. So I don't know how DOER planned to make the decision as among those 4. But I had thought, and I think a number of other people had thought, based on the chronology, that Boston was next in line. Yesterday comes out a story saying that Boston had withdrawn. I believe, but I don't know for sure, but just reading what I have read about it, is that Boston withdrew because the state told Boston to withdraw. I don't believe, given everything that Mayor Wu has said about her intention to participate in the 10 Communities program, that Boston withdrew voluntarily. So I think what happened was DOER said, we're not substituting Boston in for West Tisbury. Well, okay, I mean, you can see. But anyway, it was just based on chronology. Anyway, I don't think anybody knows at this point, other than Boston and the state, exactly what is going on there or what the 10th is likely to be. It is not the case, to my knowledge anyway, that Boston withdrew saying the grid couldn't support its participation.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just found it surprising when they said that.
Yeah, me too, because I don't think it's right.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you very much for that brief skinny, and that we should move on to our main item this evening. So can I have a motion to, I think, hold this item, or actually, you know what? We could NAN this, because we are going to need it to file a new item for next term. And this item is asking for, we could just push it forward to next term, but I think, what would people like to do?
Why don't we redock it? And
So no actions.
We can do a no action, I don't know, is that
Councilor
okay?
Presley?
Yeah, should
I
I?
would recommend holding the item, just as there's an open public hearing on it.
Fine.
I was gonna ask about what to do with the public hearing,
I would recommend holding it.
and you can still push it into next term with the same,
I have to look in those exact specifics,
okay,
but
because I was thinking
the
you'd
item-
wanna renotice the public hearing next year whenever we get to the point of putting this out there.
at the end of this.
All right,
entire-
I'll have a motion to hold.
I'll move to hold.
We have a motion to hold. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Counselor Baker, do you have your hand up about this? You're muted.
My understanding is that the item dies at the end of the term, and
Yeah.
it's gonna have to be filed, so that's I thought your original NAN was appropriate, that's why I'm not, and I think we may be misleading ourselves if we do, but I may be mistaken too, so a lot of time we can advise it too.
Law department, what happens with the public hearing? Because we can't hold it this year and the item dies at the end of the term.
Madam Chair, I'm unclear on which public hearing you're talking about. I know that we had one earlier, but my understanding is that there's a requirement to have another one at a later date that have to be renoticed. So I don't see any issue with doing an NAN or letting the item die and redocking the next term, or even suspending the rules and having it carry over. Any 3 is appropriate as far as I'm concerned.
My only view is that we may have a little clearer idea of what the item should be, and that's, after the first year, it could be redocketed and it could be heard in due course.
It should be amended it should be changed anyway, so do we want to go back to an NAN? Okay, all right.
I will,
Oh, he just did it. All those in favor of NAN, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Councilor Norton, your hand is still up, is that intentional?
Yes, I just wanted to take the opportunity with all the folks on this meeting and Zoom who care about issues related to climate and clean energy to give a shout out to our chair. We were a mighty and hardworking working group, Councilor Crossley, Councilor Leary, and Ann Berwick and myself for, I want to say, over 2 years. Hours and hours and hours went into this, negotiations with the hospital and the chamber, and so much advocacy from people on this Zoom. So I'm sorry that we won't all get to vote on it, in final, and I'm sorry that the state is dragging its feet when obviously we need more urgency when it comes to all actions on climate, including at the local level. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the chair for her role in shepherding this along, as both chairs, Chair Leary from PF as well. So just wanted to say thank you at my last opportunity too.
Okay. Thank you so much, Councilor Norton. Okay, all right, I put 2 items on the agenda to cover one, basically because as the committee moves forward, I think there should always be an item that's looking for updates on implementing the climate action plan. That's currently item 4822, and that should roll over into next year. But the item before us is 50-22, and that is request for discussion and ordinance to require energy use reporting on behalf, and I filed this with Councilors Leary, Norton, and Bowman on behalf of the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy, many of whom are with us here tonight. In fact, I would love to introduce them, and I will be happy to recognize them after we get a presentation. Let's see if I can do everyone. In the front of the room, we have Stephen Grody, then Michael Gavelber, former chair, recently retired, Helena Brown, and almost back on the commission, Philip Hanser, and Asa Hopkins, who is the acting chair. Okay. Some of my good friends, energy nerds, a badge I wear proudly. So anyway, Mr. Ferguson, Bill Ferguson, co-chair, sustainability co-director, has been putting an enormous amount of time and effort and passion into developing this program in Newton. And co-director Berwick has put a lot of effort into drafting the ordinance we have before us today, which was in our packets, and any of you can read it. And I know that members of the Energy Commission, several members were there for every step of the way here. And I just want to, before you start your presentation, Bill, just say, I would just want to recognize how much work this has been, how carefully you have moved it into the community, how much input you have solicited and received from property owners, and it's very impressive. So I'm just going to say that at the beginning. Normally I might say that at the end, but please go ahead and give us the overview of where the program stands. We can't hear you, and we need a little more volume from you.
You can't hear me at all?
No, now we can. It was very faint.
All right, thank you, Chair Crossley. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, but there's some other weird noise in here. Is it the fan?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It stopped.
It stopped. The circulation's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it's nice to have it on, but I've never heard it do that before. I'm sorry, Mr. Ferguson. Please go ahead. We just had an odd interruption. Please go ahead.
All right, mechanical failure, sounds like.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go through this presentation as efficiently as possible to get everyone updated on where we are and also what we need to do to finish up this proposed BERDO. Note this is a proposal, it's a draft at this stage. We still have some outstanding issues that our BERDO team will be addressing. BERDO, just to make it clear, it's the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. Next slide, please.
Is Bill still
Did
there?
we lose you, Bill?
Can you go to the next slide?
Yes, it's up. Are you not seeing
You
that?
don't see it.
I don't see it now.
You had the slide deck, but not the slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. So this is kind of the table of contents of the things I want to cover with this presentation, as I said, as efficiently as we can. I want to talk about our BERDO team. Why BERDO? We've had this discussion before, but I want to remind everybody the reasons for a BERDO. Buildings covered by the ordinance, how we used Boston as a model, the emissions standard that's included in the ordinance, the compliance timeline for building owners. Next slide. Compliance flexibility. Once again, these are all sections of the ordinance. Enforcement, emissions investment fund, legal authority, and finally, issues still under review by our BERDO team. Next slide, please. This has been our team that has been working on the BERDO program and the BERDO ordinance for over a year now. We've been meeting essentially weekly, sometimes twice a week for the last year and a half, roughly. From the city side, it includes myself, Ann Berwick, and Leora Silks, who I think most of you know, if not all of you, the energy coach for the city and part of the sustainability staff of the city. Of course, Barney Heath and John Sisson have also been involved from the city side. From the Citizens Commission on Energy, Helena Brown, Phil Hansa, Michael Gebelber, and from Green Newton, Dan Rubin. They've put a lot of time and effort into this, and I think our process has been really good, in large part because of their input and because of our collaboration. I think we've developed a really good ordinance that has improvements on what Boston did, and we hope will be more implementable with building owners. Also on the Zoom today is our consultant, Philip Esch Gates from Synapse Energy Economics. We hired Synapse to provide technical assistance. They've done a great job, and Philip would be also available to maybe answer some technical questions that come up tonight. So I want to thank the whole team for all the effort and expertise they put into this project so far. Next slide, please. So this is the why Birdo question, and the answer is that the two slices of this pie that are red and reddish come to 26% of the total emissions in the city of Newton. That 26% represents buildings that'll be covered by the Birdo ordinance. It's 356 buildings and 206 owners. Next slide, please. So the ordinance addresses buildings greater than 20,000 square feet of gross floor area in the city of Newton. That's, like I said, 356 buildings. We included residential and non-residential buildings at this point. Right now, exceptions are residential condos, which is one of the questions we're revisiting, and also state and federal buildings are not covered by this ordinance. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed covered buildings, excluding residential condos, but it's all buildings over 20,000 square feet, excluding residential condos, and it's broken down by 5 tiers. The tiers are based on building type and building size. So for example, Tier 1 is all non-residential buildings over 100,000 square feet. And as you can see, there's 47 of those buildings, and there's 29 owners of those Tier 1 buildings. And the emissions amount to 42% of the total Birdo buildings emissions. The tiers actually, as you can see, go down in size, so that Tier 5 is the smallest group of buildings. It's residential buildings of 20,000 to 49,000 square feet or gross floor area. Next slide, please. We've used Boston as a model, and the differences between the Newton proposal and the Boston proposal include timeline. In Boston, the emissions reductions start in 2025. For Newton, that Tier 1 group, that biggest group, it would start in 2027. And well, in a later slide, I'll show you how it's the timeline is phased in by building size. Newton also is focused on individual buildings 20,000 square feet and larger, whereas Boston includes buildings on a parcel. For example, if you had 3 buildings on a parcel that totaled over 20,000 square feet, even if they were well under 20,000 square feet each, that would be included under Boston. That will not be the case in Newton. Newton building has to be unto itself 20,000 square feet to be included under the ordinance. So we're not getting into smaller buildings. We're not going to be getting into 6,000 square foot buildings and that type of thing. Also, another important distinction between Birdo ordinance and Newton compared to Boston is the rate of emissions reduction is not as steep in the early years in our Newton ordinance as it is in the Boston ordinance. And I'll get into that with a slide later on. Next slide, please. This shows the emissions standards table that we've been working on with Phillips Health from Synapse. And as you can see, just if we look at the assembly building use, there's 13 building uses. Each one has its own emission standard, but just to follow assembly for a second, you'll see that the emission standard declines each period, and there's a total of 6 periods. So it's a declining emission standard, which ultimately gets all buildings covered by BERDO to 0 emissions by 2050. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the rate of emissions reduction required by the Boston ordinance in orange and the Newton proposed ordinance in blue. And if you look at the Boston ordinance, the second step shows a 50% reduction by 2030. With the Newton ordinance, the second step shows a 25% reduction by roughly 2030 or 2032. So this approach is going to be, I think, easier for building owners to comply with, where Boston requires a steep reduction in emissions, and the initial phases of the ordinance, Newton, a little less steep and a little easier and less expensive to comply with in the earlier years of Newton's ordinance. Next slide, please. These are the proposed compliance timelines for building owners. So as you can see, tier 1, which is non-residential buildings, NR is non-residential over 100,000 square feet of gross floor area. The first energy report, energy and emissions report, would be due September 15th, 2025. And the first emissions compliance year would be 2027, with the first emissions compliance report due September 15th, 2028. And as you can see, with each tier, the first emissions compliance year moves out 1 year. So ultimately, the smallest buildings, the residential buildings between 20 and 50,000 square feet, their first compliance year would be 2031, and their first compliance report would be September 15th, 2032. So the larger buildings have to implement their compliance earlier than the smaller buildings in this proposal. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates pretty much what the previous slide did, only what it does show is that there's some time between when the initial energy and emissions reports are submitted and when the actual compliance begins. So there's a time for building owners to organize before they have to submit their emissions compliance report and begin to comply with the emissions standards. So and the residential, once again, going to tier 5, there'll be about 5 years of submitting energy and emissions reports before the emissions compliance standard will kick in. Next slide, please. So for building owners to comply, there are several ways to do it that provides flexibility based on circumstances that might be unique to a building. One of them is portfolios. A portfolio will combine the emissions ratings of 2 or more buildings for properties with one owner, with the same owner. So this provides flexibility by enabling a property owner to focus on one of the 2 or one of the 3 buildings instead of having to address all the buildings at the same time, and will be able to comply by using the blended emission standard for all 3 buildings without necessarily having to attack all 3 buildings at the same time. So that'll provide some flexibility with portfolios. You may, a building owner may have a building that complies initially and one that doesn't. And when you blend the emissions ratings for the 2, it could be that they both actually comply as a blended portfolio emissions rating. Individual compliance plan, it's another way of complying for building owners. In this case, the building owner can choose a base year from 2013 to the present, and that might be helpful in situations where building owners have done quite a bit of energy efficiency work, let's say, and they've shown a big reduction prior to the adoption of the BERDO ordinance. So this would enable them to take some credit for work they've already done. And the way an individual compliance plan would work is they would use, let's say it's 2013 as a base year, and have to comply by reducing their use 20% a period for 5 periods. And the periods can be 4 or 5 years. The hardship plan is another compliance option, which would be geared towards buildings that are, for example, possibly historical buildings that have unique circumstances. It could also consider possible financial hardship circumstances. These details of these options will be addressed by regulation. So the ordinance doesn't provide all the detail for determining how to develop a portfolio or an individual compliance plan or a hardship plan. Those things will be addressed through regulations following the adoption of an ordinance. And then the other compliance flexibility features, just there are multiple compliance pathways for building owners. They can do phase compliance, for instance, by perhaps electrifying part of their building, but not the whole building all at once. Energy efficiency is a compliance pathway, and then the alternative compliance payment is another compliance pathway where basically, there's a fee per metric ton that the building owner is in excess of the emissions requirement, and that fee can be paid into our emissions fund, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide, please. Enforcement will be done by the Newton Law Department. There'll be penalties for non-compliance. This once again is modeled after the Boston Burdo. The non-compliance penalties and our proposed ordinance would begin the 3rd year after the effective date of emissions requirements. And the effective date of the emissions requirement is different for each tier, as I mentioned previously. Penalties would be for things like failure to submit a report, inaccurate report, or failure to meet emission standards. Those would all be subject to penalties that are laid out in the ordinance. Penalties and other enforcement provisions do not apply to residential tenants. Next slide, please. The proposed emissions investment fund is, that's where the penalties are deposited. So any fines, fees, and penalties are placed in a special fund, and the fund is administered by the Climate Sustainability Office, and it can be used for several purposes. First, projects that benefit environmental justice populations, costs incurred by the city in administering the program, and created pursuant to the ordinance. Costs incurred by the city in complying with the program, created pursuant to the ordinance, and costs incurred by nonprofit entities that operate within the city, including but not limited to entities that operate affordable housing. And finally, education related to implementation of the requirements of the ordinance. Next slide, please. Legal authority. We have been consulting with the law department throughout the development of the ordinance, and it's new territory. It's I think the way the law department looks at it, and the way Boston also looked at it, is there's nothing that prevents it, but there's nothing specifically that permits it. So it's new territory legally, and because of that, there's speculation that there'll be some building owners that challenge the ordinance in Boston, and they'll be doing that ahead of when our ordinance goes in effect. So we may learn something from a legal challenge that might cause us to perhaps have to amend our ordinance depending on what the result is. Next slide, please. So, as I said, this is a proposed ordinance, and it's a draft ordinance, and we're going to have to do a revised draft based on how we decide to address at least these 3 issues that are shown on this slide. The first being what we're calling the Maryland approach under the state of Maryland has passed legislation that has a building performance standard similar to Berto, but it does not include electricity emissions in the standard. We have included electricity emissions in the draft ordinance that we submitted. That's the way Boston does it. That's the way Cambridge does it. But the Maryland approach looks interesting. It looks like it could make it simpler for building owners to comply, and also simpler for the city to administer. So we'll be working on that approach. The question of residential condos, our Berto team is still discussing and reviewing that question. And finally, residential buildings. I think the condo question and this question about residential buildings are related. Right now, the lower tier is for residential buildings is 20,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. I think we'll be looking at that in view of how we decide to treat residential condos. So that was a very quick review of the ordinance, and we'll be glad to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Bill. I know a whole lot of work has gone into this. If I see a question from Andrew Lee, I'll call on him first, but then I would like to see if the Energy Commission would like to add to your comments. Andrew Lee, did you intend to have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So not a question necessarily, but I just wanted to make a couple notes of clarification. First part is that the law department has been involved from pretty much the get-go with regards to just analyzing this. There are some legal concerns. This is absolutely a novel area of this particular type of regulation that is being discussed. The reason I mentioned that is we will be providing further guidance, specifically outlining what those concerns are for the City Council's consideration. The next thing I want to note is Bill did mention this is a draft. The law department hasn't had a chance to fully evaluate this particular draft. We looked at one that was much earlier on. So I just wanted to note that for the council so that they are aware that it is going to go through a thorough review by the law department, and there will be a revised version.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It's clear there needs to be some discussion about certain items. Mr. Ferguson, I'm happy to ask the members of the Energy Commission who have been deeply involved with you, but I think, as I mentioned to you earlier, when you first told me about this Maryland program, can you explain to the lay audience, what does it mean if you do not include electricity emissions in your reporting requirement, just very simply?
Well, the table that I showed you with the emission standards will change.
But for the property owner,
will decrease some. And it'll mean that the building owners will not have to address emissions from electricity. And the reason that we have an interest in that is we have been presented with some information by our consultant, and he actually has this information available on those slides if we want to go through it in detail. But it looks like by 2030, our electricity supply in Massachusetts will be about 90% decarbonized. So that area is being addressed by the state and by state policies regarding electricity generation. So it's something that we think we could eliminate from the concern of the building owner, so he can focus on on-site emissions and decarbonizing their building, rather than, for instance, doing things like having to buy RECs to offset carbon in the electricity side. They could be putting that money into fossil fuel reduction and elimination.
Okay, so that,
does that help?
well, I'm gonna try, see if I shorten it, tell me if I'm off base. So for the property owner, it means that they don't have to report their electricity use or just
No,
emissions?
well, I think the way we're looking at it now, we're still gonna want to have property owners report their electricity use.
Okay, so where I wanted to go with that is, I understand from the Maryland program that there's an option for requiring retrofits of the building. So even though you're not going to be monitoring emissions by electricity, we could still require reducing energy demand. So if you're an all-electric building, it doesn't mean that you're off the hook just because you're an all-electric building. You still need to tighten up your building. If I could just try to put it simply, does that make sense?
Yeah, one of the discussions we've been having within our team is perhaps having a energy use intensity requirement, and what that would do is it would help make sure that building owners are still paying attention to electricity conservation or electricity efficiency, even though it isn't part of the emissions requirement.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're discussing, and we think that by reporting electricity use, even though it isn't part of the emission standard, we'll be able to get a sense of whether we need to institute this EUI standard in addition to the emission standard. So we'll generate some data that will give us some insight as to whether having an EUI standard in conjunction with the emission standard is needed.
Thank you. I'm gonna see if the, Phil Hanser from the, let me just introduce you. Phil Hanser from, almost on the Energy Commission, but soon to be a member of the Energy Commission, is here and would like to speak to this.
Yeah, just one of the issues is just to avoid the possibility that in a fossil fuel conversion, a building would make a choice to make a relatively inexpensive less capital intensive exchange. So for example, he's got heating and he decides he's going to put in electric resistant baseboard heating as opposed to when he gets rid of his furnace. And since they're only concerned about the gas emissions, right, the on-site emissions, theoretically you could do that. But if you put a cap where you make sure that you're reporting what the emissions, what the total energy use is of the building, you'll essentially preclude that.
I'm a total energy nerd, so I heard everything you just said, but I'm not sure it was crystal.
Right. So
it's not a simple answer.
Okay, the simple answer is you don't want somebody to take a gas furnace, throw it out the window and then put in electric resistance baseboard as a substitute. Because that's a very inefficient approach to doing it.
Right.
It's got low capital cost, okay, but it's very inefficient.
I
And
guess,
so the cap on emissions, EUI, or the reporting of it, as we're discussing, would preclude that from happening.
so there's a way to make sure that if people are going clean with electricity, and just because the grid's cleaned up, there's a way to ensure that people are using highly efficient equipment, not some old toaster.
Yeah, you don't want people running around putting in little, those, what is it, little small heaters in everybody's room.
Exactly, yeah, I just,
Efficiency is just
so-
as important as what type of fuel we're using.
yes, efficiency is hugely important.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I hope the Energy Commission is gonna be talking about with Mr. Ferguson is yeah, when you cap it, I see you. I had Lyle first, but I just, is incentivizing building retrofits so that your energy use goes down. Okay, Counselor Baker and then Counselor Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it appropriate to just ask some questions about the draft ordinance, or do you want to talk policy? Because there's some language in the ordinance I was puzzled by.
If it's, the level of Scrivener's stuff or clarity of a sentence, I would suggest we don't want to do that tonight, but if it's substantive, then I'm not sure why not, but
Well, I guess, I just want to point out that when you get into the ordinance, there's an unusual provision. First, this is being, the penalties are enforced in a sense by the law department, which has the ability to waive them. I've never seen an ordinance where the law department was authorized to enforce a specific provision of our ordinance. They advise us, but it's rather unusual to see that. So I'm not sure the genesis of that particular provision, but it just indicated to me that this is, as Mr. Lee has indicated, quite unusual territory. So I just highlight that as an example of something that I hope that they will continue to examine, because our normal process is to have an administrative agency charged with enforcement, and also the amount of the fines and so forth are a function of what our home rule authority is plus what we've got under state authority. So at some point, all of that is going to get sorted out, but that's why I just wanted to raise a question at this point.
thank you.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
comment on Councilor Baker's points. That's exactly why I made the statements that I did after Bill's presentation, just to make clear that's a perfect example, Councilor Baker, of something that's going to have to be revisited. It will be revisited. The substance itself is probably a better use of the committee's time tonight to discuss the actual language, the actual provisions are going to be fully vetted, fully reviewed, and those kinds of inconsistencies and things that you just noted, Councilor Baker, will be addressed.
That's fine. Thank you. I'll yield to other people on this.
Thank you. And a good point to raise, that surprised me too, but yeah. Counselor Ryan.
Yeah, I have a clarification on what we were talking about before, from a non-energy nerd. So what you're talking about, so heat pumps is the way you want to go overall for everything. And you're talking about the old electric that you never wanted to have in Massachusetts because in the winter it would kill you.
Right,
The
so
amount of money you'd be paying.
what they're saying is there's this new idea coming out of Maryland that you all recently have talked about, or over the summer, whenever, and they're the first ones who have excluded buildings that are electrified from an emissions requirement. Tell me if I'm not saying this correctly. And the reason is that the grid's getting cleaned up, right? But you don't, just because they're using electricity, you want there to be a mechanism for assuring they're going to use high efficiency current equipment. When you might have had this in your house at one point. It was really common, right? Baseboard.
One room I do.
baseboard radiation, which is
Yeah,
like
right.
having a toaster,
Yeah.
big toaster in your room, so, yes.
It's just like having a stand-up plug-in against your wall
Yep.
permanently, but,
Yep.
yeah, and it costs way too much money anyway, but.
Yep.
So what you're looking for on electrification as far as heating and air conditioning is heat pumps.
Very much, yeah.
Or some variant on them.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you want high efficiency
Right.
HVAC
Okay.
systems to be installed that are all electric.
I wonder if some of you want to speak to, I don't see another hand up, but if you want to, never mind. I see Ann Berwick's hand up. I'll go to you first.
Okay, thanks. So just quick, I just want to emphasize, given the conversation we had a few minutes ago about the other topic, electrification, that what's different, sort of, really 100,000-foot level, what's different about Birdo from everything else we've considered is that it applies to existing buildings.
Right.
So the electrification ordinance, 10 communities, Representative Khan's bill, a whole bunch of other bills that are pending in the legislature only apply to new construction and substantial renovations. Birdo is a more, in many ways, a more important deal because it applies to existing buildings and therefore, of course, to new buildings.
Right, thank you for that. I think the council is aware of that, but it's always a good thing to remind folks about, because it also makes it a lot harder to meet higher standards of performance because you've got everything in place already. And that's actually the next topic I was hoping could be addressed. And then I see Councilor-elect Block on tap here. But I was hoping either members of the Energy Commission or others could speak to the efforts you have undertaken to meet with, consult with, question, and tour facilities, property owners to understand their real life concerns and where what you've learned from that so far and how much more work is needed there going into next year. Is there a person, I know several of you have been regulars, Mr. Gavelber, Helena Brown, and Philip Hanser, and I attended one of your on-site meetings, and I just think that's extremely important work. Can anybody speak to, where do you think you are?
I was not on that site visit, so.
I could start. Bill has put together a panel of building owners who, are very interested in this. And so we've been having those sort of discussions. And then we've also recently visited, I think it's a 20,000, 25,000 square foot apartment building, because you've got to walk, the building to see how it would impact. As you mentioned, this is for existing buildings. And also addressing a number of these issues raised by building owners. They're used to what's already in place. This is something new, and so it's really hearing those concerns and figuring out how we're going to respond to it. And Synapse, the consultant, did a case study of that apartment building that we visited, and you really start uncovering how much of your fossil energy use is for domestic hot water, how much is for heating, what are the options, and what are potentially the costs, and how do you meet this declining staircase of emissions? And everybody's going to have a different takeaway from that, but we are listening to these building owners. And I think when you see that it's not like tomorrow you have to tear down the building because you can't do this, that particular building won't start having issues until 2035. And even then, because a large portion is to domestic hot water, you could do something for heating water, which is somewhat smaller percentage of the heating than converting everything all at once. So it's, you know, it's an interesting exercise, and I think very important, and I think Bill gets major credit for putting together this group of building owners.
Great, thank you for that. Bill, on that point, before we move on, can you speak to how much more work you think there is? I know there's some folks both on the Energy Commission, and I think Peter Bearer, as well as Synapse, maybe doing some work to understand certain things better. I'll just say that when I was there, I was very impressed by the level of new ideas and new technology that some members of the Energy Commission came in with to share with the property owners, and that was very impressive because there was a direct exchange of, you know, I'm concerned about this and I don't know, you know, how I can meet this yet, and you all had material at hand and said, well, have you seen this technology? You know, so that kind of communication is great.
Sure. There's new technology that's being developed that will, we expect will make it less expensive to comply with BERDO than what would happen if with existing technology. So we know, like for an apartment building, where you have, you know, multiple apartment units being served by a central hot water heating system, that could be an expensive project to try to comply using air source heat pumps. But we know now that there's another option that looks like it's going to be available next year with some manufacturers, which would enable building owners to keep their central heating systems and replace boilers with air to water heat pumps. So that's a technology that's being developed that I've asked Peter Bearer if he would develop, work with a couple manufacturers I've identified who have offered to assist us to develop a set of schematics for how to address this specific building and come up with a cost. So that work is going on now, and from that, you know, I hope we get good results, and I hope it'll show that technology will provide significant assistance to building owners in complying with this standard in a fairly cost-efficient way. So that's a specific case study we're working on that our BERDO team members have been involved in, and our consultant, Philip at Synapse, has been involved in, so that we can better understand what options are available, how much they cost, how they're going to impact building owners. So we're doing some work on that. We think that's really important.
Thank you. So I think we have a question from Mr. Block.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Crossley. Appreciate the opportunity to ask Mr. Ferguson a question. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Cambridge BERDO excludes all residential buildings. Is my understanding correct about that?
Yes, Cambridge excluded residential buildings except for the reporting requirement. Boston does include residential buildings. So,
maybe you could help us understand, if you know what the conversation was like in Cambridge regarding the inclusion or exclusion of residential buildings and how that affects your discussions regarding the inclusion or exclusion of condos, which you itemized, and why rentals should be treated differently from condos. Maybe you just give us a flavor for that.
Well, I think that's something that is very much under discussion now, but a couple of the considerations regarding condos are, I think there was a comparison of residential condos to single-family homes. So the question was raised, why would we require residential condos to come under the ordinance when we don't include single-family homes? So that was one concept that we've discussed and have been considering. Another concern that I have is the slide I showed, one of the slides I showed indicates there's 206 owners, property owners of the 356 buildings. When we get into residential condos, there's 2,100 property owners. And not that we would be dealing necessarily with everyone, but I'm not sure what the ramifications would be on our administrative efficiency. That's something we're trying to understand better as to what effect having 2,100 owners would have on our ability to manage the program and focus our efforts in the right areas. And I think Andrew might weigh in on this, but I think there potentially is some problem with privacy concerns if we started asking residential condo owners for their energy data. Does that sound right to you, Andrew?
Well, we're talking about a couple different things here, but just talking about the disclosure piece itself, there's a clear distinction in state law with regards to how large commercial buildings are treated as opposed to single families. There is a privacy concern that's protected by state law with regards to identifying individual households and their energy usage and their basically utility usage. That is protected, so that's also a consideration. I haven't been involved in the exact discussions with regards to condos versus, large apartment buildings and things like that, but you also look to the fact of ownership, right? If it's a single building owned by a single entity or individual, that the whole building can be required to disclose information in a way that is deaggregated or aggregated and be identified from particular households, then that is permissible. But again, like I said, if it's a situation where there's a disclosure requirement for any property that you can identify the actual specific household and their usage, then that's problematic. So that is a consideration.
So how did Cambridge land on excluding all residential?
I'm gonna ask Philip Eschgates from Synapse. He has some firsthand experience with Cambridge that maybe he could try to help shed some light on your question, Mr. Block.
Mr. Block, thank you for the question. The Synapse was involved. We were also assisting City of Cambridge with their building performance standard. And I personally led a series of stakeholder engagement sessions with various groups of building owners in Cambridge to understand their concerns, their questions, and to relay information about the proposed, some of the proposed design aspects for the policy. So I bring some firsthand knowledge of that process. I will say the City of Cambridge staff initially, and council members that worked on drafting the ordinance initially included residential buildings. It was taken out in the final council hearing by amendment based on resistance that came from residential condo owners. And those residential condo owners were among the most vocal of the stakeholders that I engaged with, raising opposition to the ordinance. And in my opinion, it was the concerns of residential condo owners that sunk the whole proposition to include residential buildings, such as apartments as well. I'm happy to elaborate further.
Sure. Well, sounds like it was an interesting discussion. It just, for somebody coming to these issues, but not without a lot of background, it did look awkward to treat condominium owners in a significantly different way than renters. I understand the implications about privacy that would apply to condo owners and that wouldn't apply to renters. Still, it's an interesting kind of dilemma, which we probably ought to reflect on some more. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Block. It's obviously a conversation that it deserves a lot more attention and understanding. We couldn't possibly cover all of the work and thought that's gone into where they are so far. Clearly, there's more decisions to make, which will have to go into next term. Are you ready? Okay. I do have some comments. They've been the members of the Energy Commission have been waiting to make. Councilor Baker, I'll pick you up next. Is that all right?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So Asa Hopkins, would you like to speak?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and the members of the committee. Thanks for the chance to come and talk with you, and thanks for taking up this important ordinance. I'm pleased that so much of the Energy Commission, if two of them weren't actually quite members of the commission, might even have a quorum of the commission here with you tonight, but we had an immediate past member and an almost member, so we're not quite there. But the way the Energy Commission works, we are a very collaborative. It doesn't matter exactly who's a member. We draw on all the expertise of the folks who want to be engaged. We're just a collection of energy nerds, as you say, and we're here to help. So I want to return to something that Bill Ferguson said in his remarks, that buildings are 64% of Newton's GHG emissions as of the last inventory. Given the spreading adoption of EVs and the leadership from Newton Power Choice, on-site building emissions are going to be an even larger portion of Newton's next inventory than they were when that inventory was conducted in 2019. So that piece is getting to be a more and more important and more central piece to thinking about what it is to reach net zero. It's also the part, by virtue of that characteristic, it's the part we're making the least progress on. It's also the part that the city has potentially the most leverage over. Right? That's why we're more leverage over those than over people's vehicle choice or even Newton Power Choice. The city has already executed its greatest piece of leverage there, and it's making a big impact. So as was also evident in Bill's presentation, just over half of Newton's building emissions are from residential homes, and the rest are from commercial buildings, both large and small. This ordinance addresses large buildings, residential and commercial. So focusing on that piece, so the Citizens Climate Action Plan, which the Energy Commission developed in support of and in parallel with the city developing its fully adopted climate action plan for 2019, identified commercial building energy use disclosure as a key step, a next thing and a recommendation to the city and the city council by creating the process that set this in motion. The mayor and city staff have gone one better than disclosure with this proposed ordinance and moving towards a standard. This evolved approach reflects the lessons learned since the plans were finalized in 2019 especially Boston's experience and learning more about that experience with a disclosure-only approach to commercial buildings, which they found was not actually having much effect on actually getting people to decarbonize. So they moved beyond that and said, well, we're going to actually turn that into a performance standard. So I think the process that's gotten us here has been a collaborative one, drawing on all different kinds of expertise, and the city stepping forward to lead, and we really appreciate that. We also want to say we really appreciate the inclusive process that Bill and his colleagues have led. Michael, Philip, Helena have been engaged throughout that process in developing the ordinance, and we want to make sure that we continue to be engaged, continue to provide the outside expert advice that we are created to inform the council, the mayor, city staff. That's our job. So we're very happy to continue to do that. Also, at this point, I want to take a moment, clarify for the record that I'm staying clear of most of this process. I work at Synapse Energy Economics, which is the city's consultant on this process. As far as this piece is concerned, I am a city special employee kind of thing. I don't work on this for Synapse. I'm being very clear on separating that from any sort of conflict of interest standpoint. It does mean I really respect the technical analysis that has gone into supporting the development of this ordinance, because I understand it and I respect the colleagues of mine that are developing it. A few points on the process and otherwise. So the working group has engaged with commercial building owners, as Michael was just describing, understand their concerns and to educate them about the potential impact of the performance standards. That engagement has increased our confidence that the proposed standards in this ordinance are achievable and that prudent building and business owners can plan ahead to meet the ordinance's requirements without undue cost. One of the things that sets the Boston-Berto approach and then as adopted and carried over into the Newton approach apart from some of the earlier examples across the country, whether it be Washington, D.C. or St. Louis or New York City, is to set the standards all the way to 2050, so you can see the zero in that last column, so that building owners know where they're going to go and when they have to get there, so they can plan ahead and know, okay, my next capital cycle in 2037, I'm going to replace this, and I can plan, and I can have a plan to take my building all the way to zero. So when you're thinking about decarbonizing buildings, why a performance standard? Like why is that the right kind of approach? First, performance standards offer certainty to the city as a regulatory entity that the emission reductions that you're counting on to achieve net zero actually will occur, right? As opposed to a carrots type approach, you don't know whether people really adopt the technologies you want. Like here, we have a path to zero, and we can carry on. Also, as I mentioned before, this approach allows building owners to plan, to know what's expected of them, to make the changes as they needed going downstream. Also, by being performance-based and not prescriptive, it allows folks in those buildings to make the decisions about the hardware for their building that makes sense for their building, to align the renovation cycle, the replacement cycle with, oh, I was thinking that we were going to add air conditioning anyway, so now I'm going to rejigger how this works in order to be able to meet the performance standard. So by regulating the outcome rather than the details of the implementation, the city stays out of mucking around in the details, which isn't really its job, but also gives the building owners flexibility about how they want to meet a known end number. I also want to put this ordinance in a broader context. First, emphasize that Newton won't be doing this alone in two respects. First, both Boston and Cambridge are implementing similar policies, as we've talked about here. That means that policymakers, legal folks, building owners have a chance to learn from what's going on in those other places and use that to inform Newton, as we're already doing. So in that sense, we have compatriots, we have friends to be able to work with and learn collectively. Second, I haven't heard much discussion of the potential role of the state to help this kind of policy be successful. So the state, the Mass Save program is the target of much criticism and skepticism these days, but it does remain one of the nation's leading ratepayer-funded energy efficiency and decarbonization program. As this Mass Save adapts or becomes a building decarbonization clearinghouse or whatever other future may hold for it, it is changing its focus to really emphasize support for precisely the kind of activities that building owners under this policy would be needing to be looking at and thinking about implementing in their building. So it's not just that the building owner has to tackle this on their own, they they tackle it with the help of Mass Save and other state policies and programs. Also, more generally, the state has set a legally binding target of 49% greenhouse gas emission reductions on site in buildings by 2030 and net zero for 2050, and is taking the appropriate actions to get there, whether it's a clean heat standard or a climate bank or other things that they're working on. I also, but concluding bit here, that ask you to think carefully about any exclusions or exceptions that you might make in this ordinance. Any buildings that are not covered by this ordinance will still need to be decarbonized. It's not a question of whether a given condo building or a given large residential building will decarbonize or not. The question is through what mechanism and with what support and under what policy regime will that building take those actions eventually. Other city policies actions may be required to meet that objective instead if buildings are not covered under this. If the city chooses to delay action on those buildings, that will only make achieving the building's emission reductions more difficult downstream, although, as we said, technologies will help to that to some degree. That's all about this large building story. I want to make sure that we don't forget that there's a small building story too, which is the other half or more of emissions.
But that's not before us tonight.
That's not before you tonight. We did docket and propose a item for discussion before the council to think about options for how to deal with residential buildings at the same time that we put the large buildings piece in. We're continuing to work on ideas in that direction. We'll be back to you in the new term when things are being redocketed, and we're working through our priorities for next year about additional actions and ideas on how to think about the rest of the building stock. We are particularly concerned, whether for large buildings or small, about the households that have the least ability to make changes to mitigate their emissions and their energy costs, namely renters. Landlords have less exposure to energy costs. It's landlords who would be in the best position to do what you were talking about before of, I'm going to put the low capital, high operating cost electric resistance into this building, I'll reduce my emissions, good, and and the tenants will pay the bill, right? So having the kind of protections that would come, whether it's in a larger commercial building or in a residential building, thinking about renters and how they're going to play in this is an important piece of that. So we look forward to working with the committee and the council as you consider this ordinance into the new year. Look forward to continuing to work with Bill and other folks and how we're going to collectively work to meet these objectives.
Thank you very much. You might want to send that statement in to the new council or something like it. It's a long statement, so maybe easier read than spoken. But I want to make sure you know that all, as it was said earlier, when all items die at the end of the term. And often people going into the next term will recommend to the clerk's office that an item be moved to the next term, but it has to be redocketed. And probably for this item as well, we'll just hold it tonight so the language is still available, but it may well need to be revised, and clearly there's still work to be done. And I would imagine counselors are going to want to talk about a lot about impacts and understand more clearly, the different building owners and yes, the difference between who's responsible to do the work. And whether it's a rental or a condo makes a big difference there, right? The other thing is I think the new council will really want to understand better what the administrative requirements of this ordinance are, who's doing the work. Bill has taken this a long way, and Bill and Ann and all of you, but who's going to do the day-to-day evaluation of these reports and eventually evaluation of the mitigation strategies. And I don't think Bill can do more than 2 jobs at once. So I think that's a serious discussion the next council is going to have, and the mayor and with the budget and all of that. So it's Councilor Baker, did you still want to add something? You're muted though.
I was going to just ask a couple of questions, and then I assume you want a motion to hold. Is that where you are?
Yes.
Okay. The last presentation covered a bunch of the issues that I was curious about, but I do think, assuming this is not going to come back before the end of the term, but in a new term, in a new configuration, some examples will be helpful. The staged reduction in the emission standards is something that I think is I understand, and the presentation indicated that how you get there is really open to you, but building equipment replacements and the kind of cycle of useful life, I'm thinking of even just our city buildings, right? Our schools, which are we've gone through boiler replacements and things like that from time to time, and the question of is it a real step down, or is it, you know, one of those things where you make a new investment every 25 years and then you make a major shift in the capital equipment and how it works, as opposed to automobiles, which have, when you were dealing with air pollution reduction, automobiles, the sort of stock of automobiles turns over about every 10 years. And so there's a real difference between the built environment and the mobile environment, for example, and energy emissions, as I understand it. So I think that when it comes back, I just hope the commission, working with Mr. Ferguson and Ms. Berwick, might have some examples of how this literally could play out over time. You know, this is an existing building, this is what it currently uses, there's quite a bit goes. And then the other part of the question is the one that is not yet before us, which is what you refer to as the small building. That's most of the houses in the city, if we're talking about residential property. And then what that looks like is a whole other story. And finally, the last question I want to be clear about is what is the regulatory environment that the state is putting the city into? When we've been dealing with the MBTA Communities Act, we know we have a state mandate. It wasn't entirely clear to me what the mandate here is for the city to act, or whether this is the city's election. It's a matter of good policy. So those are the kind of questions I hope that could be addressed in another conversation later on, but I don't think they need to be addressed tonight unless one of the members of the presenters wants to add anything alone.
Well, I don't think, one thing I think we should say is that there, as far as I know, as far as anyone I've talked to knows, that in this group, I believe, there is no state mandate that's requiring us to adopt a BERDO, but there may, I see it, Anne raising her hand right away. There are legislative initiatives out there, so do you want to address that, Ms. Berwick?
Yeah, there's no current mandate, but there are bills pending that would impose a BERDO type mandate.
Okay. Well, it's good to know what they look like in my head. Okay.
There is an energy reporting requirement also that the state is implementing. So it's kind of like the first phase of a statewide BERDO, I think, is what I'm suspecting is going to happen.
So this area, as several people have pointed out, is moving so fast. I mean, even the idea of a virtual power grid where your automobile, an electric automobile, becomes something that feeds the grid as well as fed by it at different times is really something that's quite interesting. And but that's, I'm sure will play into how all this plays out. So thank you.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. Well, somehow we managed to still get to 9:45 in the Zoning and Planning Committee. 10:30 has been our regular, time frame for this group, but, I'm so glad we were able to have the introduction to this ordinance, at least this term. And I'm going to ask for, I have a motion to hold from Councilor Leary. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed or abstentions? And this item goes forward, and I would recommend that the clerk holds on to it for next term. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thanks for all your work. And and, keep it up.
Yes, we do.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson and Ms. Berwick. Always great to have you here and always great to work with you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
No, we have to, you know what, folks, we have to move hold on the climate action update as well, which I carried along with this.
Motion hold.
So I have a motion to hold on the climate action update as well. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstentions? The item is carried. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.